the US should be paying very close attention to France right now because their government just collapsed. Their prime minister lost an overwhelming majority vote of no confidence by their parliament. Now, that doesn't mean their government has completely collapsed. There's still Macron, the president. They can still fulfill day-to-day duties. But now, Macron has to appoint a new prime minister. The key here is that this has only happened 3 times in their parliamentary history, and it's happened twice in the past year, back in December and now again. Now, the opposition of the parliamentary doesn't want another centrist, and so whoever Macron appoints, it has to be able to gain the popular majority in the parliamentary system, which is no easy task because they're very divided, they're very fractured. And this all happened as a result of a budget proposal in which they were going to cut $50 billion. Now, France is also struggling with their debt. It's 112% of their GDP. And it's not too dissimilar as to what's happening in America with our budgetary issues, with our debt to GDP ratio. And this could be a sign of things to come. I mean, the French Revolution happened because of the inspiration it took from the American Revolution. We could be seeing the same thing, but in reverse order, because the people aren't exactly happy with their government. Their inequality, their instability is rising. And unless they can instill some clear leadership, their people might say, we've had enough of your incompetence. And if France does it again, we might too.
So the French government has fallen again, but international news media is going to be very shy about telling us the real reason why it's fallen, the economic reasons why it's fallen. On his way out, the ousted Prime Minister, Mr. Francois, said, "You might kick me out, you might remove me, but that does not change the economic problems for the country." I'm paraphrasing. The real reason why France has failed as a government is because Africa has taken its power back. Ever since the country of Niger, in the Sahel, in Central West Africa, decided to nationalize its uranium, France has never been the same again. This uranium that state-owned companies like Orano, French-owned companies like Orano had been siphoning, stealing under the previous government, today, Niger turned off the faucet. Niger said no more. So Niger, under the new governance of President Tiani, is nationalizing its uranium. This uranium France was stealing not only to light its beautiful cities like Paris and Nice, it was also using it to run its electrical manufacturing and industries. All of these are processing and running their nuclear reactors on top of it all. So these things that are the foundations of an economy, like manufacturing and processing, right now that the electricity in France, their energy is not safe. They do not have a reliable place to get their energy from. This is why they're suffering. But it's not going to be told that way on international news media. You're only going to hear it from people like me and others who are truth tellers. So yeah, this is why. This is what happens. This is proof that African leaders are in service of either them or us.
Réveille-toi, le pouvoir est à toi. Français, réveille-toi, le pouvoir est à toi.
So France is broke because African countries have kicked them out and they don't allow them to exploit them anymore. And as you saw, there's a big rally in the country. They're protesting the president, Macron. They want him out. Yesterday they voted out the prime minister, which was the 3rd prime minister in 14 months. He got a vote of no confidence, the same last 3, because the last 3 prime ministers cannot present a bill or cannot present a plan on how to revitalize the French economy. Now, the only way to present a plan to revitalize the French economy is by re-enslaving or re-exploiting African countries. And Russia is helping African countries. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, they're building nuclear plants. Like, it's helping African countries. That's Russia's plan of fucking up the West. So the West is using a proxy war to destroy Russia. Russia is deciding, okay, I'm going to take away your means of living. So Russia has been saving African countries from France, and they have a planned demonstration tomorrow, the 10th. Wednesday, the whole nation is going to have this massive demonstration tomorrow in protest of Macron. But yeah, France is broke, and everything they're doing right now, a lot of the French understand it, but majority of the masses don't. Everything they're doing right now, nothing can be done. The only way France goes back to where it used to be is to find new countries to exploit for resources. That's it. France has nothing. They have nothing. England is next. Oh, I also forgot to add, this is why France has been pushing for a war with Russia. France has gotten 26 countries right now to agree to invade, to go into Ukraine, which is going to be a violation, which will force a war with Russia. The reason France wants this is if it does that, then Russia is now faced with more problems, more wars. Then it takes away some of its resources from Africa. It creates new chaos, and then France uses that as an opportunity to go back into Africa and then find new countries to exploit. The only way France can survive is exploitation. So they need war right now to make that exploitation happen.
The greatest thing about learning about USSR history is about how absolutely deadass they were about decolonizing Africa. Stop giving them AK-47s. No. Yeah. One day the Europeans thought to themselves, you know what? Let's just free the African. No, it was because the USSR was supplying them with AK-47. Stop giving Africans AK-47s. No. They made African decolonization stamps, sent them artillery units, even named multiple universities after revolutionaries from Africa. How did the Soviet Union do this? It's because the Soviet Union was one of the first countries in the world to enshrine the equality of all races into its constitution. Nelson Mandela said himself that the Soviet aid was integral to the liberation of South Africa. He literally said that when the West turned their back on South Africa, the Soviets stepped up. Many African countries, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Angola, Ethiopia, to name a few, gained independence from colonialism with the help of the Soviet Union. So yes, they cared about Africa. The Soviet Union did establish initiatives to provide college education for many African students, especially in the fields of medicine and engineering, as opposed to Western aid groups who wanted to basically take over those industries themselves for the African people. It sort of begets the old teach a man how to fish proverb. So although individual people in the Soviet Union may have been racist, as a system, the Soviet Union put anti-racist ideology into practice better than any other Western country at the time, by far. Also, I'd just like to remind everybody, isn't it funny that when Martin Luther King just wanted civil rights, the American government accused him of being a communist? They didn't accuse him of being a Nazi, they accused him of being a communist. They're like, wait, this black guy wants to give him civil rights? Fuck. Without communism, the West would still be colonizing Africa.
These two cartoons are about Africa. Can you guess where they're from? Both were made in the mid-20th century. But let's take a closer look at how the United States portrayed African countries.
Completely untouched by civilization.
Now, let's take a look at how the Soviet Union did it. Same subject, same century, but two very different stories.
French police have arrested hundreds of people as anti-government protests were launched across the country. Demonstrators blocked streets and highways, and in Paris, a restaurant was set on fire. The protests are part of a grassroots movement called Block Everything, taking aim at Emmanuel Macron's government in its austerity measures.
Who would have thought that France was the welfare queen this whole time? As soon as Africa cut them off, nationalized their resources, and built their own social programs, the French government collapsed. But the Western media will blame their budget deficit or the way Parliament is set up. But let me tell you what's really going on. Their prime minister had proposed taking 60 billion euros from their reserves to close the budget deficit. But keep in mind that their reserves are the African gold they pillaged, and that pipeline is closing since Burkina Faso nationalized their gold and pushed them out. So when they said, let's use the reserves, all hell broke loose, and the prime minister was removed. Then France had an energy crisis. 70% of its electricity comes from nuclear power or uranium. Now Western media is going to tell you the price went up because of Russia's war in Ukraine. But Niger supplies 20% of all European uranium. So when Niger told Orano, a French nuclear company, to halt all production, they disrupted France's entire energy sector. Then while they will paint Africa as the place that needs foreign aid, what we have learned about the French economy is that they've been spending money like their colonies will always be there. They have been in Africa since the 1600s. All those people, all those resources that they stole. And apparently they don't know how to manage their money. So now that there is a global push to make Western economies more conservative, Western media blames France's social programs for their budget deficit. They want to use France as a test case for why their economy should be more capitalist, more corporate run, more conservative. But the real problem is that Europe has been a welfare state for centuries, supplied by Africa and its other colonies. And we have taken away the empire subsidy. So as Africa reclaims price, policy, and production, France won't fix its books by attacking welfare. They'll either have to exchange imperialism for fair trade or crumble altogether.
For decades, France looted Niger's uranium, and now 1,500 tons are locked in Niger's hands, and Paris is losing it. Now, imagine robbing your neighbor for 50 years and then getting mad when they finally put a lock on the door. That's literally France and Niger's uranium beef. But here's the tea. Niger's military government kicked French nuclear giant Orano out of its Sommer mine in Arlit, a mine that pumped uranium since the 1970s. France owns 63% of it, calling it a partnership. Translation, Niger got the poverty and pollution, France got the glow. Now Niger says enough is enough. The state-owned company Sopemin is running things, and the 1,500-ton stockpile stays put. Orano, they've gone crying to the World Bank Tribunal, demanding compensation and threatening charges if Niger literally sells what is on Nigerian soil. But here's the twist. Whispers say buyers from Iran, Russia, and Turkey are already circling. The same France that got rich off Niger's uranium is now clutching its pearls over who Niger sells to. At the UN, Niger's PM Ali Lamine Zine didn't hold back. Uranium brought misery, pollution, rebellion, corruption, and desolation to Nigerians while making France rich. And he's not lying. French cities were powered by Niger's uranium while Nigerians couldn't even keep on steady electricity. This isn't just about one mine. Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, all rewriting mining codes, pushing out foreign powers, and flipping the script on resource control. Bottom line, those 1,500 tons aren't just uranium. They're leverage, sovereignty, and their power. Power France doesn't want Africa to hold. So let me ask you, after decades of being looted, is Niger wrong for finally saying our resources, our rules?
The example of what happened in Niger when the government decided they were going to take over the mining of their uranium. The French companies that were mining the uranium were paying the government 80 cents a kilo for the uranium, and then turning around and selling the uranium to the rest of the world at 200 euros a kilo. So that one move from the Nigerian government to say we are now going to take ownership of our own uranium, they went from realizing about $1 billion in uranium resources to over 300 billion a year. Do you realize what I'm talking about? No amount of NGO could bring that kind of money. And this is only one mineral. Now imagine the country taking inventory of all their minerals and benefiting from their natural resources like the rest of the countries in the Western world. If I may use the example of what
France just got outplayed by Russia in Africa. Yep, you heard it correctly. For over 50 years, France has been running the uranium mines in Niger. But now it seems as though that is being threatened because Moscow has swooped in with promises of a nuclear power project. So France has been running these mines for over 50 years, and how this would really work is that Niger would dig out the uranium, send it over to be processed for nuclear reactors all the way in Normandy for France, and then in return they'd get imported electricity and coal, which does not sound like a fair deal. And it seems as though the Nigerian junta definitely agreed, because just in June they nationalized all the French-run mines, which means that that is all under their control now. And so it is in this vacuum that Moscow has swooped in with the promises of more than just mining, more than just taking over these mines, but also the promise of a nuclear power project. And what would this entail exactly? Well, it would entail training local engineers. It would also entail even the supply of medical applications of nuclear technology. And if this actually does turn out to be successful, it would be the first nuclear power project in West Africa's region. And this is obviously a big deal because now Nigeria is being included in the conversation, not just as suppliers of raw material, but also as partners in the conversation about where those raw materials go and also how they benefit the locals. Now, Imurorin is one of the largest uranium deposits, and that's still under Nigerian rule, especially because France has no access to it. Also, there are 1,400 tons of yellow cake uranium piled up in Niger. Paris has no access to it at all. And now the question then beckons, what exactly is going to be on the line? Now, firstly, we know it's going to take billions of dollars. It's also going to take a number of years. But also erecting this nuclear power project in this region is a bit tense, especially given that it is considered quite hostile globally. And so now we have to beckon the question, is it worth it to put all this work in for a region that ultimately it may not be as successful in? But that's not even the point of this. The real point and question is, what do you think about this new outfit and this new thing that Russia's got going on? Because their Minister of Energy, Sergei Tivlev, specifically said, we must create an entire system for the development of peaceful atomic energy in Niger. Now, it sounds fancy and nice and all, but I don't know what you guys think. Could this be post-colonialism? Could this be colonialism specifically? Just dress up in a cute suit. I'd love to hear what you have to say, so please do drop your comments at www.thevoiceofafrica.com for stories that actually do matter.
France is officially ending its permanent military presence in Senegal. Yep, after 60 plus years of just keeping an eye on things, they're giving back all their bases by summer 2025. But let's be real. Senegal has been independent since 1960, but French troops somehow forgot to go home. They've been chilling at Camp Guyot, flying out of Dakar's airfields, and operating like it's still 1958. But with Bassirou Diomaye Faye as president and Ousmane Sonko as prime minister, things are different now. Sonko literally said, "Why are there still foreign troops in Senegal?" Which is wild that it even needed to be said. But this isn't just about France. It's about Africa waking up. Mali kicked them out. Burkina Faso kicked them out. Niger told them au revoir, and now Senegal, a peaceful, democratic country, is doing it without a coup, without Russian mercenaries, and without setting the place on fire. That's major. Meanwhile, Ivory Coast is still letting French troops post up like it's an Airbnb. So what do you think? Is Senegal leading the way for real independence, or are they going too far, too fast?
When this collapse comes, and it's going to come, we in the UK are going to need to have some serious reflection on mistakes that have been made, and especially our foreign policy in history. And we're going to have to rely on these nations that we've been stealing from for years to deal with us, because we need them. We're not like Russia. We're not self-sufficient. Russia has its own oil, its own food, it doesn't have to import anything. It can survive without the world. We, a tiny little island, do not have that luxury. We need to import. That's why we've stolen so much history. So, what happens, do you think, in the next decade as African countries are rising and getting more powerful? And the Western countries that had them under their heel for so long, like the UK where I live, are on the way down and their economies are collapsing. What help do you think we're going to get from those countries that are becoming more powerful? How do you think that the Africans are going to look towards the English with regards to trade deals and buying their uranium off them if we need to? They're not going to look too kindly, are they? Especially if there's absolutely no apologies whatsoever. And as far as I can tell, this country doesn't apologise for jack shit. And the reason it doesn't apologise is because if it apologised for the stuff that it's done, it'd have to start giving back all of the stuff that it's stolen. I've spent hours inside the British Museum. That place is it's a treasure trove. It's incredible. And it's nearly all nicked. And we're going to have to, in the UK, in the West, really start looking at our place in the world and really start looking as to whether we really do value the things that we say we do. I saw somebody earlier saying, This is what the West do. They just play pretend. It's no wonder the West now accept a man being a woman if he just identifies as one, because we in the UK have been identifying as a nation that is on the side of law and order. A nation that values free speech as it's censoring everybody. A nation that values freedom of the press and is a shining light and a beacon for freedom of the press throughout the world, whilst it's literally torturing the best journalists the world has ever seen in its capital. We say we are these things. Our government says them all the time. The diplomats are like that. But it's just all hot air. Nothing we do as a country backs up what these people are saying the country is. Nothing. I love my country, and that's what I want my country to turn into, to be. I think it's the most patriotic thing to put.
I love this new era because the good days keep stacking up. It's like an instant karma. Even the air feels different. Imagine being so entitled to African resources that the minute you stop getting it, you start burning your city down to the ground. That is exactly what's happening in Paris. They are burning everything down to the ground because they are mad their economy is dead. It's literally dead. Businesses are closing like none other. The universe is finally paying these people back for everything they have done to our people. So this is for everybody in Africa. It is also for everybody in Haiti. Shout out to everybody in Haiti. Whatever y'all doing, keep doing it because these people have not seen anything yet. And the best part is to watch these people destroy themselves by themselves.
So France didn't recognize Haiti as a country, and America didn't recognize Haiti as a sovereign nation. And the French came to him and was like, listen, we'll recognize you as a country if you pay us reparations for all the slaves that we lost and the land that we lost in the revolution. So Boyer pretty much agreed. And what they wanted was 150 million French francs from Haiti, which in today's money is $30 billion.
That's
$30
crazy.
billion. People wonder why countries like Haiti are in the state they're in today. Like, if y'all would have just left Haiti alone, like, how does it go from being the #1 colony the way it is today? You telling me that Haitian people can't capitalize off of their own resources and become a rich nation?
Apparently the reason that France has been able to get the stereotype of being lazy is because of their exploitation of African countries. I'm just hearing, and it makes sense. Like, I don't know why I didn't put two and two together, but apparently with everything that's been going on with France, if you're not aware, they have recently gone through 2 governmental collapses. A lot of it has to do with countries like Burkina Faso and other African nations essentially cutting ties with France and essentially putting an end to a lot of the exploitation that has taken place with these countries over the years. But I never thought about the whole stereotype of French people and other European nations being able to have this kind of laid back vibe that, like, people kind of just do whatever they want to do. The shops will close at weird times. I didn't connect the ability of that country to have that be a way of life to the exploitation of resources from African nations. That's actually fascinating. And it makes me love what's happening in Burkina Faso and other countries like Burkina Faso. It makes me appreciate it so much more.
Okay, all of the comments are like, why are the bakeries closed in August? Guys, everything in France is closed in August. Unless you're in Paris or like a very touristy part of the South, everything is closed. People take their holiday in August. And like, holiday is not like 2-3 days, long weekend, maybe a week, maybe 10 days, like 10 cheeky days. No. French people take the entire month. They're like, it's August, leave me alone. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind. If you are a tourist visiting Paris and you're like, I can't wait to try this restaurant, it's going to be so good, I've been looking forward to it, this is like a Michelin star, whatever. Whoever the chef is in the kitchen is not the main chef. And it is not the sous chef. It is someone, because all the big dogs / medium dogs / even everyone's on holiday. everyone's on holiday. I don't know who's making your food. So either the establishment you're going to will be closed, or if you're actually going there, it will usually be some random person. Now, this is a generalization, okay? Like, don't even come at me in the comments right now. But that is just to say I would not go to a restaurant I'm looking forward to going to in Paris in like late July, August, because it probably won't be as scrumptious, delicious as in the fall or any other time of the year, because August is sacred. So like right now in the 8 villages that are like in my area, only 1 bakery in all of those 8 villages is open, and most villages have like 2 bakeries each, maybe 2, 3. Like I know my bakery is closed. Enemy Bakery is actually not closed, but no one's even going to Enemy Bakery. And then the bakery we're going to now is one of 2 in a village, and there's a line around the block every single day because all the villagers are going. So that's why I went to the ATM, but I would not go back.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. And right now, you can save £50 per person. That's £200 off for a family of 4.
Africa is the only reason why Western Europeans get to enjoy such a high quality of life, especially for France. They brag about being able to live well even though they don't have to work as hard as Americans, but they omit the fact that all that comfort they enjoy comes off of the back of African resources and labor. England, Portugal, Germany, Belgium, Italy, and France all made a massive scramble for Africa in the 1880s, and France by far still has their foot in their old colonial ways. And even though these African nations have declared their independence, France and a couple other countries are still exploiting them, and they have given nothing in return to these African nations. They have built very little in infrastructure and construction. They have given next to nothing compared to how much they have taken to support their ways. Out of the 8 African coups that have happened since 2020, 7 of them were from French colonies. The French do not know how to build, they do not know how to innovate, they do not know how to grow democracy in any part of the world, which is why for the past 60, 70 years, they have just had French puppets that were ruling these African countries that finally got sick of how they were being treated. China has only taken an interest in Africa for 30 or 40 years, yet they have built more industry and infrastructure than all of the other European countries combined. So of course, the African nations are going to have a much more favorable disposition towards China, since they are the ones who are actually building factories, roads, bridges, hospitals. China is actually divesting a lot of their own resources to make this possible. And you guys know how I feel about a lot of Chinese policy, but they did hit the nail on the mark when it comes to Africa. It is pretty clear that Russia's Wagner forces have had a lot to do with the coups that have taken place in Gabon, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso. And even though the Russians aren't trying to actually help anyone, I believe they are trying to foment chaos and destabilize a lot of positions in the West. This can be an overall good thing for Central Africa. Even though the Russians' goal is to create a lot of instability for the West, this instability can spread to a lot of other African countries, and that can actually hurt a lot of China's positions there. Make no mistake, despite what you're seeing in the media, the US will find a way to exploit whatever is happening in Africa. At first, they seemed that they were very pro taking down the Niger coup, and now they've kind of backed off, and they said that they are going to respect the current government. No, a lot of these African nations don't have a favorable viewing of the United States. The US will always find a way to profit off of whatever instability is caused. If there is going to be a disruption in the energy supply, I will bet you that the US will make money selling its liquid natural gas and oil. If there is going to be widespread war, the US is going to make a lot of money selling its weapons. I would not put it past the United States interests to have their cake and eat it too. They may be happy about China building all of this infrastructure because that means the US doesn't have to. It means the US doesn't have to invest in anything to make Africa more prosperous and rich, but they can reap all of the benefits for when that actually happens. In my opinion, I think that every Western interest should be kicked out of every African country and then reintroduced as a potential trading partner among peers with equal standing, instead of these African nations having to deal with the West like guaranteed exploiters.
French immigration is just reverse colonization. France goes to countries 100 years ago, loots all of their resources, leaves, then the Africans are like, what are we going to sell in order to make money to progress? They don't have it because France took it, so they go to France. And then France says, what are you doing here? You colonized them, you left them nothing.
France is broke and they're expecting their people to work more in order to pay for it. France is drowning in debt, now at a staggering 3.3 trillion euros with an annual interest payments of 60 billion euros. And their solution? Well, the Prime Minister just announced a new austerity plan to bring the deficit down from 5.8 to 3% of GDP by 2029. And the flagship move to do this? Cancelling public holidays, namely Easter Monday and Victory Day in Europe. Clearly not important, and this should generate roughly 4.2 to 4.5 billion in extra revenue by making people work more. On top of that, they're freezing pensions, cutting healthcare by 5 billion euros, and slashing public sector pay and jobs. Because, taking away holidays, taking away pay, and cutting access to critical services is always a good way to keep French people from rioting. And yes, the backlash has already been intense. Unions say this is a real provocation against workers, and both the left and the right are threatening no confidence votes. And half the country thinks this is an assault on French cultural identity and hard-earned rest, while the bureaucrats in palaces, like those at the Economic, Social and Environmental Council, enjoy $121,000 salaries, 54 days off, lavish perks, while taxpayers foot the bill, roughly 45 million euros per year. So apparently France isn't suffering from a revenue shortage, it's suffering from bureaucratic bloat and a budget built more on perks than on productivity. But what do you think? Is France overdue a reality check, or is this a step too far? French people, I'm curious.
We are outside the Gare du Nord train station in Paris, one of hundreds of locations across the country today where people are gathering and protesting to bring France at a standstill. Who are they? They are students, they are railway workers, doctors, people from all ages and all backgrounds, and they are angry. They are calling for different things, but the common thread here is deep anger directed at Emmanuel Macron's government. They resent being asked to make sacrifices when those they describe as the ruling elite, they say, grow increasingly disconnected from their daily lives and their daily struggles.
What's happening in France? Why are there protests right now? Okay, last June, Macron dissolved the National Assembly, and so the French population had to vote for a new parliament. The left won the elections, but Macron appointed a right-winged prime minister. This right-winged prime minister got overturned by the parliament in December, and Macron appointed a new prime minister, a right-winged prime minister, again. This prime minister was really, really unpopular. I think it was historically unpopular. And he was again overturned by the parliament Monday, 8 September. And yesterday, Macron appointed a new right-winged prime minister. Our anger is legitimate. Our vote is being denied. Our democracy is in great danger.
We got some breaking news. The French government has collapsed after the prime minister has been voted out. He got voted out in a vote of no confidence. This is the second time in 9 months. This motherfucker has been in office 9 months. And the last prime minister, 9 months ago, was voted out on a vote of no confidence. Basically, the people of France saw the plan that the last prime minister had to bring France back from their impending ruin, and they said no, we don't trust this plan, so they said we're not confident in it, and they voted him out. Macron that was the guy Macron chose. Macron now chose this guy 9 months ago. This guy has come up with his budget plans, blah blah blah, put it up, and the French people are like, yeah, nah, we don't fuck with this, so they just voted him out. Now he is expected to submit his resignation tomorrow, and here's the issue: the far right and the far left are both saying no matter who Macron brings up next, they're voting no. Like basically, long story short, they're looking for someone to help them figure out how to stand back up after African countries started kicking them out. The entire French people exist because of Africa. Literally, they're a fucking parasite nation. They're a nation of parasites. All of them, parasites. You know what a parasite is? That's what France and French people are. So now that African nations have started kicking them out, France is being exposed. So now the French people, like this vote of no confidence, they're going to keep replacing because the only way to get back to where you were is to enslave and colonize people again. That's it.
France's downfall does not need to be studied because it's as easy as ABC. What Daddy P said? Easy as pie.
France is collapsing and their economy is in shambles, but there is something a lot of people is not telling you. The reason why France is collapsing and their entire civilization is up in flames is because Africa, the continent, is cutting them off. Multiple African countries is cutting off France from their resources. You understand why a handful of African countries seem so poor based on perspective? It is because 90% of their income, of their earnings from their resources goes directly to France, and that stabilizes their economy. Niger, for example, cut off France from their uranium, and now Niger is going to use their uranium for their benefit alone. For the longest time, I have waited for this. I waited for the collapse of Europe and see if they can actually manage to pull through without the resources of Africa. Can Europe actually strive without the colonialism on Africa? Is it possible? We're about to find out. The UK is also facing significant pressure from Nigeria, because Nigeria is thinking about cutting these people off as well. If you ask me, Nigeria should have done that by now. Get rid of teaching French in schools and focus on your own language. Ethiopia just opened up a massive game changer, created one of the biggest dams in the world. The day of European rule is coming to an end, and the rise of Africa is finally upon us. I think it's about that time to go back home. I think it's time. But first, a couple things. The civil war in South Sudan and the war that is happening in the Congo. That needs to end ASAP. And all the other conflicts that is happening within the African continent in these African countries needs to be settled immediately. Italy, Roma, Spain, they're all facing the pressure of being cut off or already cut off from African resources. Ladies and gentlemen, colonialism is coming to an end, and I couldn't be happier. Yes. Now we just gotta wait for America to cut off Africa and we'll be golden. That's all I gotta say in the matter. It's Onyx and I'm gone.
To the UK, all of America's Western so-called allies, they need to make an urgent reassessment of their relationship with the United States. Of course, this also means that the people of those countries in the EU and so on, they need to make a serious reevaluation of their own leaders, all of whom are just going along with America's plans, and who seem to be the only leaders left in the world who still think it's a good idea to follow Washington's orders. You know, 60% of Europeans no longer feel that America is a reliable ally or partner. That puts EU leadership at odds with the population in this regard. Even the European Council on Foreign Relations said that America's interests and Europe's interests no longer align, particularly on trade and security issues. And of course, they're right. America has been pursuing a systematic campaign of destabilization across Europe for years, and particularly since the Ukraine war and the Russian sanctions. I've been talking about that since the beginning. Thanks to these policies, Europe is in a death spiral. Bankruptcies are at record highs, business closures, home foreclosures, companies relocating, factories shutting down. I mean, Germany is in a rapid state of deindustrialization. America is trying to pit Europe against Russia, pit the UK against Russia, which is depriving the whole continent of affordable energy, and it's prompting militarization, which they can't afford, all of which is for the benefit of American oil and gas companies and for the US weapons sector. People are becoming radicalized. Extremism of all stripes is emerging. You know, Europeans feel that their societies are more polarized than ever. Protests are taking place more frequently and are turning violent more frequently. Repression is getting worse. It's getting more severe. Terrorist attacks are increasing, particularly from far-right groups. The International Center for Counterterrorism attributes this, at least in part, to the war in Ukraine and the influx of neo-Nazis and other extremists and the flood of small arms that were supposedly being sent to Ukraine. The whole continent is sliding into a irreversible strife. And that's blatantly by American design. The US is also trying to drive a wedge between Europe and China, even though Europe desperately needs Chinese investment, Chinese capital, Chinese technology, and the Chinese market for their own exports. And again, European leaders are just going along with this in defiance of their own populations and obviously against the interests of their own people, because EU leaders are subservient to Washington neocons. America always intended for the war in Ukraine to spread. They never intended for Ukraine to win. The whole point was always to accelerate Europe's destabilization, their isolation, and their deterioration. And so far, no one is doing anything whatsoever to pump the brakes. So yes, America and its so-called Western allies, the UK, the EU, are really at a make or break point. You know, people always talk about being on the right side of history. Well, Europe needs to start making decisions on the right side of the future, because their relationship with the United States has frankly put them into an existential crisis. The fact is, BRICS is building an alternative to the old US-led world order, and Britain and the EU need to understand this. The global system of the 20th century is a relic. The balance of power no longer favors the G7, and the Global South is the only vehicle left with wheels still on it and with a working engine. And Europe needs to hitch a ride with them if they don't want Uncle Sam to drive them off a cliff, because that's where they're going now. I mean, I know it's going to be a traumatic adjustment for these Westerners, for these Europeans, accepting the fact that your so-called Western civilization and your societies are actually unsustainable, and your great American protector and benefactor is actually cannibalizing you. But on the other hand, turning to the Global South for your survival isn't really anything new. I mean, you never would have actually even been anything of significance without your imperialism and colonization of Africa and Asia. So the truth is that you've always been a dependency, and you still are. The difference is that you used to get to pretend that you weren't the dependent one, because you used to be able to just steal from the Global South in order to prop up your societies. But you've always been dependent. So there's no real change there. Just an attitude adjustment is necessary, and an acceptance of your real status vis-a-vis the Global South. You will have to humble yourselves to some degree to cooperate with BRICS. But believe me, it's better than the utter humiliation that you're going to suffer if you continue cooperating with the Americans.
Economic ties there that aren't going to disappear overnight. Do you follow a lot of...
You're speaking from a position of only knowing what happened up until 2024. So you're not aware of the current president, Donald Trump, and his policies towards Europe, which are quite aggressive, putting strong tariffs, trade tariffs against Europe, and even talking about the possibility of America withdrawing from NATO.
You're bringing up a crucial point. You're right. My knowledge wouldn't include any events after 2024, including any policies of a President Trump. It sounds like those actions would have significantly impacted transatlantic relations. That's fascinating. How much can change in just a few years? Got me thinking, though, even with those challenges, wouldn't there still be common ground for the US and Europe? Security concerns, economic ties. Those are pretty fundamental, aren't they?
Well, I think, in my opinion, I think that America would like to actually subjugate and subordinate Europe and make it more of a dependency rather than an ally.
That's a pretty strong claim. It's definitely a perspective I haven't encountered in my training data. While it's true that there can be strong arming in international politics, it's hard to imagine a scenario where the US would openly seek to subjugate Europe. There are deep historical and cultural ties and a shared commitment to democratic values. Those bonds are hard to break, wouldn't you agree?
You know you don't mean that.
Maybe not. But I try to avoid making sweeping judgments about entire countries or groups of people. You know what I mean? Things are rarely black and white.
It's not a question of making sweeping judgments. It's a question of looking at the predictable outcome of policies and analyzing whether or not you think that those predictable outcomes were the sought after outcomes as opposed to accidental ones.
I can see your point. It's definitely worth analyzing the intended and unintended consequences of policies. It's like trying to solve a complex puzzle, right? You have to look at all the pieces to get the full picture. What makes you think those outcomes were intentional in this case?
Because they were predictable.
That's a fair point. Sometimes the most predictable outcomes are indeed part of a larger plan. Makes you wonder what other outcomes might be predictable, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think for me, partly as someone whose ancestors are largely European, Here's the way it appears to me. I grew up in an environment in which history was presented in the following lopsided way. It kind of starts with Greece and Rome and then evolves into the modern period. And I've been regaled with the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, Athenian democracy, Roman slavery, the Middle Ages, the arrival of the big European states, the clashes that produced colonialism in which Europe becomes the dominant power on the whole globe and carves up the whole globe among the European nations. That famous conference in Berlin in 1884, when they literally sat in front of a map of Africa and carved up Germany would get this and France would get that and Britain that. And then the explosions that we call World Wars I and II, which were mostly, not all, but mostly European events. Europe is the center. Europe is the dominant. Europe is where I look to learn about literature and science. And now Europe is becoming more and more an unimportant corner of the world. It is becoming what it used to look at the global south as, an unimportant little corner of the world, good for growing bananas or rubber plants or something else. Now Europe is itself becoming a small corner. The modern development of high technology, it's a non-European event. It happens in the United States. It happens in China. It doesn't happen anymore in Europe. The major industries that are growth industries are elsewhere. The industries of Europe are dying, are disappearing, are shrinking. There's a joke that England is on its way back to being what it once was, a cold, wet, offshore island of the continent of Europe. You know, haha, but there's wisdom and truth in all of that. The center of activity, the locus of growth, it's all elsewhere. Europe is less and less important. The war in Ukraine, which is a war in Europe, is being decided by the United States, which isn't in Europe, and Russia sitting down and talking, Russia that has declared itself and its future to be Asian. Literally, people are walking away from Europe. And pretty soon, you're going to see scientific people, artistic people leaving Europe. Europe is going to become a tourist destination and not a whole hell of a lot more, unless they're very careful. This is staggering. This is the relative decline of Western civilization and the rise of, I don't know what we're going to call it, Eastern civilization or Global South civilization. Enormous changes that include the decline of this system, which was a product of Europe's dominance. People should dwell on it because there is nothing so dramatic as the decline of Europe that you see now. It is the only thing more impressive to many of us than the decline of Europe is the denial of the decline of Europe. It is amazing. One watches really minor politicians in the world picture, like Keir Starmer or Emmanuel Macron, talking as if they were the head of the country France and England once were, but aren't anymore. You look at Britain, and you see the pomp and circumstance of the coronation of King Charles. There it is. All the drama, all the pomp, all the circumstance of an empire that isn't there anymore. They just have the coach and the horses and the to-do, the simulacrum of what it once was, not the reality. And Mr. Macron, emerging from the Élysée Palace today, one begins to laugh because you're watching what is either a clown or someone mimicking a clown, or a clown so far gone he doesn't know he's a clown. And that's very funny, except for the French, who are now toying. Half of France wants to believe with him and supports him because he's the symbol. And the other half, like the rest of the world, says, go away, you are anachronistic, leftover, way out of place.
Seen a lot of news about how local Europeans are mad that tourists are just ruining their cities, and they're complaining and they're squirting the water. You guys just have to accept at this point that you're our Disney World now. That's your function in this world. All your economies have stagnated. You don't produce anything besides the prostitution of your own history and cured meats. That's what you have to offer the global economy. Just riding off of the fumes of the luxury goods and culture you created centuries ago, and that's really all you have. China is making solar panels and you make manchego. What do you think is going to happen here? Look on the bright side. Okay, you had your fun, colonizing the world, pillaging and extracting wealth to make your nice little piazzas and palaces. And so now you have to accept that you're just museum cities. You're a museum as a city, and all the natives are little mannequins that we can look at and poke. And they say, oh, would you like mustard with that? That's it. You're animatrons. And so when the tourists come to your country, you should say, thank you, merci, thank you so much for coming and visiting our poor little playground, because that's what you are. You're our playground. And if you also want to have your nice little pensions and your health care while taking off 9 months a year and retiring at 42, then you should just accept that you're a living, breathing, it's a small world ride. That's what you are, and that's the trade-off. That you get to retire at 12 years old, and you're not a real country.
Europe is in a dilemma. Europe has shot itself in both of its feet in terms of the sanctions on Russia. The people in Germany, the people across Europe are suffering. The states of Europe have tried to put a cushion on that to stop it really hurting, but that can only go on for so long. If they were to have the similar approach to China and look at sanctioning and breaking relations, the European economy would completely collapse. So they realise that our relations are too interconnected for that. But at the same time, so the situation that is there, and they know that. But what is increasing is their hostility and their rhetoric to China in terms of foreign affairs and the role, and that can only be, I suppose, fueled by their close relationship with the US. So they have become subsumed as an independent identity into just being really the tail of the US dog. That's really, and I feel very sorry to say that. And anytime I meet somebody outside Europe, they go, what has happened to Europe? And I say, yeah, that is a question we ask ourselves every day. What has happened to Europe? Because it is not in our interest to have China as not being a positive partner. So they know that. But it's also in our interest, I think, for China to be playing a role to push for a multilateral world. And the problem is that the US are losing their dominant position. They have lost it economically, and they're losing it politically. And in many ways, when, it is, as they say, the last bite of a dying snake, it's the most venomous, it's the most poisonous, and the instability that's hurting citizens all over the world, including in the US. It's so sad. It's so sad. But I think it's from a position of weakness rather than strength. And that can go on for some time, unfortunately, and it can bring a lot of hardship to a lot of people, but that's the process at play here.
After several African nations kicked France out of their countries, France is falling apart.
Now, you probably remember in the past couple of years, many African countries have been kicking the French out of their countries. Now, these included countries like Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali. And things haven't been going well for the French economy ever since. Just last week, the French Prime Minister resigned because he just couldn't fix the economy. So how did we get here? Well, let's dive in. Now, in the late 1900s, many European countries started to leave Africa after they had controlled and colonized it for a couple of hundreds of years. But not France. France left, but only in name. In reality, France was still running things and they still kept control of all of these West African countries. France still controlled 14 countries in Africa. Now, so what France was doing here was that they signed agreements with governments of these countries, either through bribery or through negotiation without actually exposing the downsides of the agreement. So negotiating in bad faith. So this agreement said that these countries needed to keep most of their reserves in the French currency and it needs to be kept in France. And also, now the central bank that ran the currencies of all of these countries had a French representative who had a veto power. Now this means that these countries couldn't make decisions of their own long-term investments because France will always have a veto power to say, no, I don't think you should do that. Now this includes investments inside their own country. So if they wanted to build a road, they wanted to build schools, they couldn't just access their reserves because their reserves, more than half of them, 65%, were kept in France. Now, when the France defend themselves, they said that this benefited these countries because their currencies didn't fluctuate because their currencies were linked to the franc. But this also meant that if things are going bad in France, the currencies of these countries also lose value, which meant that any bad decision that France does will definitely have huge consequences on the currencies and the economies of these countries. So in a nutshell, these countries were propping up the French economy. Now, on top of that, France was also taking a large amount of resources. So 30% of France's uranium that it used to produce electricity was mined in Niger. But more than 90% of the people in Niger didn't even have electricity. Now, there were also mining companies that were coming from France, digging up the gold and buying it at a very cheap amount because remember, they maintained their control of the value of the currency between the franc and those countries' currencies. And then they will take them and then sell them at a higher price to the rest of the world. Now, starting about 5 to 6 years ago, there started to be a resistance in these countries. That's when military coups came in. That's when we saw the rise of people like Ibrahim Traore and other leaders around the region. Now, these leaders, when they came in, they cancelled most of these contracts. But on top of that, they removed that veto power that allowed France to veto anything that these countries wanted to do economically. Now, this came with a huge burden on the French economy. So starting from 2022, when they started to see that the show is about to end, they started to put in measures to try to prop up their own economy. Now, the other problem they have is that most Western countries, including those in Europe, those in Asia, like Japan, South Korea, and also the United States, they have an aging population. This means that there's a lot of people who are about to go on retirement, and there's no one who's going to come and replace those people in the job market. Now, this is very bad because when you retire, you're no longer producing anything that helps the country, but at least there will be someone who comes in and take on your place, who will be taxed, and that tax money will be used to prop up the economy, to build roads that you are going to use, even though you're no longer contributing to the economy. This includes your retirement. So the money that gets deducted from your account is not being stored in a single account and then when you retire, they're going to take it and give it to you. It's being used for investment. It's being used to build things. And the process here is that when it's your time to retire, the money will be taken from those who are going to be working at that time and it should be used to pay you off when you retire and cash out. But the problem in many Western countries is that many people are about to retire, but there's no people who are going to come in and replace them. That's why those countries had to seek out workers from Asia and Africa. That's why you saw a lot of people who migrated overseas to go there and work, including me. It's because they're trying to replace aging population. So France has the same problem. So what they did is that the first step that they did, I think it was 2022 or 2023, they came out and they said that they're going to raise the age of retirement. So instead of retiring at 60, they increased it to retiring at 62. That means that they have delayed the amount of time that they need to cash out those people who are retiring. And also, they're adding 2 more years to those people who are working to add more value into the economy and contribute. They also increased it from that to 64, but that will only be implemented, I think, in 2030. So as you can see, they're trying to solve the problems, but that wasn't enough. France also have a very huge deficit. This means that the amount of money that they are collecting from tax is less than the amount that they are spending in the public spending, things like schools, roads, administration, and all of those other things that the governments need to do. So what do? They borrow. And now France also has the highest borrowing in Europe. So they've been borrowing a large amount of money, and it's becoming very difficult now to pay back that money back. On top of that, because of all of these problems, France's credit rating has lowered, which means that now whenever they go to borrow, they're going to have to pay even more money. So what they did is they came with a plan. The plan included removing 2 holidays. They are saying that we have 2 holidays, we need to remove them. People need to be working on those holidays. That will produce more money for the economy, and we can use it to reduce the amount of debt. People were having none of that. They were like, no, they're not going to take away my holidays. Just think, as a South African, for example, if they say June 16th is being taken away, the 1st of May is being taken away, definitely you will have something to say about that, and you won't be happy. Now, on top of that, they're saying that they're going to cut public spending. The money that is being spent on welfare, the money that is paid to people who are like old or people who are unable to work for themselves, they want to cut that. And people are not happy about it, so they came out. So the Prime Minister went to Parliament and said, guys, this is the plan, this is how we're gonna do it. Who is agreeing with me, who's not agreeing with me? And then he challenged them to a vote of no confidence, in which he lost, and then he was removed. So that's how bad things are in France right now. The economy is not doing well, they don't have a way out, people are angry, people are resisting, but something has to be done. It's either you need to cut on the spending, or you need to increase tax, or you need to work more. It's one of those. There's no other way. So we're gonna see how people are gonna react.
The video depicts a march by masked French ultranationalists in Paris chanting Europa Youth Revolution as part of a demonstration organized by the Comité du 9 Mai, a group known for its neo-fascist and royalist ideologies. This event occurred despite a government commitment to ban such ultra-right demonstrations, highlighting tensions between far-right groups and state authorities in France. The march took place on May 10, 2024 in the 6th arrondissement of Paris, where several hundred participants gathered, showcasing symbols and chants that have previously sparked public outrage and led to promises of crackdowns by Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin.
Who cares if Americans or Europeans want to throw immigrants out of their country or fucking areas? Honestly, who cares? The people who do care are engaging in forms of white supremacy. They are putting the European centers as some supreme object of recognition, and they believe that to be thrown out of the supreme recognition is to be lesser than. We can't let these people be thrown out of Europe. Europe is such a nice place. Why would you want to be thrown out of Europe? Why do you guys want to throw them back into these caves? Why do you guys want to throw them back into these jungles? Don't you know they don't have water over there? They don't have PCs. You understand? That is the sentiments that these people who pretend to care about immigrants actually bear. Who cares if people get thrown out? Human beings adapt. Human beings grow, for fuck's sake. You are not doing anyone a favor. You are simply engaging in white supremacy and defending Europe as this supreme object of placements of recognition. That is the only thing you are doing when you are engaging with this. Oh, we gotta stop them. Oh, Trump wanna throw immigrants out. Trump wanna throw immigrants out. Like, shut the fuck up.
British ruling class is infected with self-delusion. The whole, you're talking about a country right now that is nearing open rebellion against its government because the government is dedicated to the destruction of its own people. And he's a part of that. I think the truth is as follows. He's obviously completely delusional and he's wrong. Russia hasn't lost a damn thing. Russia is in better shape now than it's ever been. And Russia obviously is interested in peace, as any sane person, any sane state anywhere in the world would be interested in peace, and is looking for partners in peace. But the partners are reluctant to leave this thing called NATO and strike out on their own, with the exception, obviously, of Prime Minister Orban and I would argue Fico in Slovakia. They're at the vanguard, though, of a very large mob that is beginning to form. NATO is finished. I've said this 1,000 times. It's a terminal patient. In other words, you walk in the room and here's the terminal patient. He's hooked up to all the machinery. He can't speak, move, or do much. And people like Ricketts want to give the patient a haircut and a shave. The truth is, the various others in the room are going to pull the plug on this patient. It's going to go away. NATO doesn't serve the purpose for which it was founded. And it has been wandering in the wilderness looking for a reason to exist ever since the fall of the Soviet Union. They picked the wrong reason to exist, which was war on the Soviet Union. But they're globalists. They need this enemy picture. They need the lie. They need the narrative that's utterly and completely false and fictitious. They need it because if it's given up and people realize, gosh, we've lost badly. NATO has been a total failure. They've thrown everything they have but the kitchen sink at the Russians, and they've been crushed. And we've killed millions of people or destroyed this country of Ukraine. It may never recover to its former position or strength ever. And all of this for what? To supposedly harm, hurt, destroy Russia. It's a huge failure. If Starmer is compelled to admit that, if Macron is compelled to admit it, if Merz is compelled to admit it, they're finished immediately, within minutes. I think they're all going to go away shortly anyhow. But nevertheless, that would be the downfall of the entire globalist project, of which Project Ukraine is a big part. Remember, these are all the same people that invited millions of people from North Africa, the Middle East, and elsewhere to come into the various European states. And it's created chaos and havoc because the people that live in these countries have said, wait a minute, we can't afford them. We don't want them. Why are they here?
Europe is having a massive immigration problem, and we need to talk about it. The conversation typically devolves into debates about nationalism, xenophobia, and multiculturalism, or the fact that it's failed. They also include all of the crime that immigrants are currently causing. But what no one wants to confront is the real root of the issue. Europe isn't importing people because it wants to, it's because it has to. Just look around. Europe's native birth rates are in free fall. Most countries aren't even close to the replacement level. And that minimum replacement number is 2.1. Look at every one of these countries. Not a single one of them is at the proper replacement level. These numbers are not just low, they're in a demographic death spiral. And they have been for quite some time. This is a chart from 2001 to 2019 for all of the countries in Europe. And this wouldn't even be a problem, except they built entire societies around an expansive welfare system and with pension plans and an aging population that it has to service. This graph behind me is from 1980 to 2014, but it depicts how much greater a percentage each country has had to pay for those services. These are entitlement structures that depend mathematically, as in they require a growing youth labor force to replace retirees. This graph behind me depicts the tax burden on the labor force of each country that has to fuel these entitlement systems. So with fewer babies being born, you either raise the taxes, which is currently between 37 and 43% depending on which country you talk about, or you import more labor through immigration. So immigration isn't just a cultural political issue, it's a European necessity. It's a requirement for the system to continue. European leaders won't admit it because they're cowards, but these countries are bringing in immigrants to an attempt to plug the demographic hole left behind people that won't have enough babies in order to fulfill the social contract. And the problem? Well, this is a short-term patch that doesn't even work, and it's causing long-term instability that's going to unravel the system. And so you have to solve the underlying issue. Why aren't people having more babies? Or better yet, why didn't their governments tell them that they had to if they wanted to sustain this welfare state that they've created? While on the topic, let's stop pretending that the European model of multiculturalism is working, because it's not. Immigration in and of itself is not to blame. It's the complete abandonment of the expectation that immigrants assimilate to their host countries. Instead, Europe embraced a model where you just stack cultures on top of each other and hope that natural cohesion occurs, and it clearly hasn't. Cohesion requires shared identity, a shared set of values, not a patchwork of clashing worldviews that never reconcile. So let's be honest, if Europe refuses to address the issues of their falling birth rate, their bloated entitlement system, and their unwillingness to foster real assimilation, then this crisis won't go away. It'll only get worse. And on top of your bloated welfare and entitlement state, your leaders have pledged an additional 2 trillion euros from 2028 to 2034 for European defense and Ukraine assistance against Russia. So unless Europe accepts these hard truths that I outlined in this TikTok, it's just Europe rearranging the chairs on the deck of the Titanic.
Y'all, I'm in Paris on vacation, just vibing, and they was protesting yesterday. They is not fucking around in Paris. Like, they not fucking around. They drawing on all the artifacts. Fuck it. They got blood coming out the baby's eyes. They like, yeah, no. We serious. Stamp that.
So let me see if I've got this correct. France is currently facing gross destitution. France is poor. France's economy is failing. The only way France can save its economy, save its cultured, educated, civilized, and progressive nation, is for the 14 African nations who have currently cut France off to go back to allowing themselves to be exploited. And in so doing, save France's economy and the very fabric of their society from crumbling altogether. And in this way, France can then be in a position to offer foreign aid to Africa via those stolen resources, giving Africans a fraction of a percent of what was stolen from them back in the form of foreign aid, and thus save Africans from poverty themselves. And in this way, France's economy will survive. And of course, since Africans are too backward to self-govern, France can continue to play a role socially, politically, and financially, essentially paternalizing the very countries that it is stealing from in order to prop up its own society. And so the only way for both Africa and France to survive is for those Africans to put their ego aside and let France go back to stealing from them. Do I have that right?
The actual quote: "Without Africa, France will have no history in the 21st century," was actually said by Francois Mitterrand in 1957. So those people that keep saying it's Jacques Chirac, it wasn't Jacques Chirac that said it. It was the guy before Jacques Chirac, Francois Mitterrand. He said it. Without Africa, France has no history. They're in the 21st century, which is where we are. We're basically saying they're going to go back to the third world. As you can see, anger over budget cuts. They're cutting budget because, and they're increasing taxes because Africa has cut them off. Their main source of income is gone. So now the retirement, look it up. They're going into their retirement. They have no money. France is the second largest economy in Europe, right? Okay. Right now, ask yourself, French people, what has France used to prop up its economy this whole time? What has France used to build the Champs-Élysées and all the... Africa said no. And remember, the French, what was it? There was a French general that made this video, said this. I'll find the video and I'll send it to you, and I'll make a video about it. He said, if they don't do shit right, within one generation, French people will be going to Africa as immigrants to look for work. It starts now.
But I want to go back, if I can, for just a minute, to Africa's past instead. You see, by the early 1900s, most of Africa, it was colonized. Maybe the better word is owned by mainly 7 European powers, right? It was Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Spain, Portugal, and Italy. And as you can see on this map, they literally divvied it up. They just divvied Africa up into parts and then forced the people in those areas to adapt to their languages and their cultures while they exploited Africa's resources. It was a successful exercise in control through administrative domination. Now, since then, many regions of Africa have kicked out those guys, those colonizers, and they've gained their independence. And they're now being courted by the United States, instead, by Russia, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia's nemesis, Iran, but most of all, by the Mac Daddy, China. China is expected to continue investing hundreds of billions of dollars in infrastructure in Africa. They're planning to build and announce roads, water treatment plants, communication systems, power plants, and a whole lot more. And here's the thing about China. Here's the thing about China that is a differentiator, if you will. In Africa, it is not perceived as a threat. Why? Pretty simple if you think about it. It has no history there of exploitation or colonization. So why is that important? Why are we even talking about this on this day? Here's why. French President Emmanuel Macron has just come out and he's apologized to the nation of Rwanda for the harm that his country brought to the Rwandan people, including for France's role in the genocide that occurred in 1994 that resulted in the deaths of 250,000 people. But wait, today, this guy, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas, he went even further. He's announcing that Germany is not only acknowledging and apologizing for its role in the genocide that took place in Namibia in 1904, Germany is actually going to offer reparations for its colonial past with a commitment of more than $1 billion that's going to be paid out over the next 30 years. Imagine that. Imagine that.
They can't stop being racist. They can't stop being supremacist. They can't stop being bullies and colonizers and tyrants. They can't adapt to the new reality that no one is scared or impressed with them anymore. And they can't wrap their heads around the fact that the moment any country in the global south, in Africa, in the Middle East, in the Muslim world, the moment that we have any options, the moment that we have any alternatives, any opportunity to get away from you, we do it. You have no concept of just how much you're despised and how deep the resentment and the anger against you is. How deeply you yourselves planted the seeds of that anger and that resentment, and how strong the roots are of the tree of anti-Western sentiment that you yourselves cultivated in our lands. You don't understand how we've been praying and we've been waiting for any chance to finally rid ourselves of your presence, because your presence is nothing but interference and disruption and imposed weakness and subjugation. You actually convinced yourselves that we liked how your boot felt on our necks. And you actually seem surprised to find out how much we always hated it. You're surprised because you never listened. You're surprised because you never cared. You're surprised because your supremacist mentality made you incapable of hearing our grievances. Your supremacism made you only capable of hearing what you wanted to hear. So now, when the entirety of the global south is rejecting you and expelling you, you're bewildered. I mean, who are Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso to defy America? Some of the poorest countries on earth. But why are they poor? Because of you. And you think we don't know that? Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso are three of the reasons that you're rich. And you're why we're poor. And you imagine that we're not intelligent enough to figure that out? We've been knowing that. We know it ages ago, but we're only now able to actually drive you out. And like I said, the moment that we have the ability to get rid of you, we do it. And if you're surprised, well, that's a you problem.
So many of these countries around the world are incapable of governing themselves. Then it's time for us to just put the imperial hat back on to say, we're going to govern those countries if you're incapable of governing yourselves, because enough is enough. We're done being invaded.
Because our own national security risk is at stake.
Exactly.
National security interests are at stake.
You could say that about pretty much all of Africa. They're incapable of governing themselves and benefiting their citizens, because the governments there are all about looting and pillaging and lining their pockets and going shopping in Paris instead of actually making their country better.
People on the left are going to watch this. They're going to say, wait a minute, Eric Prince is talking about being a colonialist again.
Absolutely. Yes. Enough. Because if you go to these countries and you see how they suffer under absolutely corrupt, made-up governments that are just criminal syndicates, the people of Africa, the people of Latin America, a lot of them deserve better. Now, some countries are...
All of the wealth and the prosperity that they have is stolen. It's all the result of pillage and exploitation. It's the result of greed and vicious oppression. And because this is so, they're the loudest voices preaching about human rights and freedom. It's all deflection, purely deflection. When you tell them that Muslim civilization is superior, they'll say, well, why are so many Muslim countries poor then? Or they'll say, we invented all the technology of the modern world. Well, why does everyone want to come to the West? Why does everyone want to immigrate to the West if we're so bad, etc., etc.? None of these are arguments for genuine civilizational authority or supremacy. None of these are moral arguments. None of these are arguments that substantiate superior Western values. They're all materialistic arguments. Again, because they have no understanding of how to properly assign value. They don't understand what makes a civilization civilized. And the answer to all of these arguments, all of their arguments, the answer is the same to every one of those arguments. The answer is Western brutal violence and oppression. They imagine that material value equates to moral value. If our violence and savagery makes us richer than you, then it makes our civilization better. No, it just makes your so-called civilization savage and violent. And it means that you loot and pillage better than actually civilized nations, because civilized nations don't do that.
How the U.S. kept Latin America poor. Latin America didn't fall into poverty by accident. Behind the coups, the wars, and the chaos was U.S. intervention. Nicaragua. In the 1980s, the U.S. funded the Contras to fight Nicaragua's leftist Sandinista government. The Contras attacked villages and used their U.S.-supplied weapons to smuggle cocaine into the U.S., fueling the crack epidemic. Congress tried to stop it, but Reagan's team kept funding them secretly. Remember Iran-Contra? Argentina. In the 1970s, Argentina's US-backed dictatorship killed 30,000 people during the Dirty War. Some victims were drugged and thrown alive into the ocean. Meanwhile, US businessmen invested heavily in the country's industries. El Salvador. During El Salvador's civil war, the US gave billions to its military. That army trained death squads that killed tens of thousands, including priests, children, and entire villages, all to stop leftist revolution. Chile. In 1973, the CIA helped Chile's military overthrow socialist President Salvador Allende. They feared Chile would become another Cuba. The dictator Pinochet tortured thousands and let foreign investors profit off Chile's economy. Honduras. Honduras became the U.S. base for Contra operations. In 2009, a U.S.-backed coup ousted the elected president. Why? He supported a new constitution that threatened elite power. The result? Skyrocketing violence, poverty, and mass migration north. Cuba. In 1959, Fidel Castro overthrew a U.S.-backed dictator in Cuba. The U.S. tried everything to stop him. Invasions, assassination attempts, embargoes. They even backed the failed Bay of Pigs invasion in 1961, triggering the Cuban Missile Crisis and decades of isolation that hurt its economy. Guatemala. In 1954, the CIA overthrew Guatemala's elected president, Jacobo Arbenz. His land reform threatened profits for the U.S.-owned United Fruit Company. The U.S. backed a military coup, starting a civil war that killed over 200,000, mostly indigenous people. These weren't isolated events. They were part of U.S. Cold War policy. Stop socialism, protect business, no matter the cost. Latin America is still living with the consequences.
The Hidden Holocaust, a genocide nearly twice to 3 times the size of Hitler's campaign to exterminate the Jews. Belgium's King Leopold II was responsible for the death of 10 to 15 million people from 1885 to 1908 in what is today known as the Democratic Republic of Congo. If you missed it, that's 10 to 15 million people. That's like wiping out the entire population of New York City, Cairo, Sweden, or Belgium itself. This is the story of how Leopold's regime colonized, exploited, murdered, enslaved, and maimed the people of the Congo, and how Brussels' dark colonial past is catching up to it today. When King Leopold II was born in 1835, Belgium was only 5 years old. He was the eldest surviving son of Leopold I. Most of the royal families of the time in Europe were actually related. For example, Leopold II was the first cousin of Queen Victoria of Britain. Leopold inherited the throne of Belgium when his father died in 1865. But by the late 19th century, most of these royals had ceded power to parliaments and cabinets that yielded the real political power, as was the case in Belgium. There is really nothing left for us kings except money, were the words of Leopold to German Emperor William II while watching a parade in Berlin. And so, obsessed with acquiring more wealth, frustrated over Belgium's small size and stature, and keen on establishing his country as a colonial power, Leopold decided to join the European colonization of Africa. In his own words, quoted by US historian Hochschild in his book King Leopold's Ghost, Leopold said, quote, "A fine chance to secure for ourselves a slice of this magnificent African cake." And the scramble for Africa was moving fast. To put it in perspective, in 1870, more than 80% of sub-Saharan Africa was under the rule of indigenous chiefs and kings. 40 years later, all of it, apart from Ethiopia and Liberia, were colonized by white settlers. Colonization was an unattainable extravagance for a Belgian government which did not possess a navy or even merchant marines. But Leopold had his own Machiavellian plans for Africa. He hired the explorer Henry Morton Stanley to travel up and down the vast Congo River basin, setting up trading posts, building roads, and persuading local chiefs to sign treaties with Leopold. Back in Europe, Leopold cast himself as a philanthropist, willing to spread the benefits of Christianity and Western civilization to African natives, opening up the path for civilization in the only part of our world that it still hasn't reached, piercing the darkness in which entire populations are shrouded, is, I dare say, a crusade worthy of this era of progress. This is part of Leopold's speech during the Berlin Conference in 1885, a racist and misguided civilizing mission narrative, enough to convince the US and other Western European powers to recognize a huge swath of Central Africa, around 2 million square kilometers, 60 times the size of Belgium, as King Leopold's personal property. It was the world's first private colony, and Leopold called it État indépendant du Congo, the Congo Free State. Ironically, he had more power over this area than he did his own country. Leopold never visited the Congo, but it became a major source of his wealth. Initially, Leopold was interested in ivory, a material greatly valued before the appearance of plastics. As the rise of the automobile industry arrived, rubber became essential. A big source of wild rubber was the Landolphia vines in the great Central African rainforest. Leopold paid for the formation of a local private army. The 19,000-man strong Force Publique was tasked with exploiting the much-needed rubber. During this period, the brutality of Leopold's men was unparalleled. Women were held hostage and men sent to collect rubber. The women were raped. The men who were unable to find enough rubber or tried to defy colonials were killed. An infamous practice that became widespread during this period was maiming or chopping off the hands and feet of Congolese children, women, and men. Photos of the time clearly depict the horrific reality. The reasons behind it was as morally void as the practice. For each bullet used, a soldier of the Force Publique had to present his white officer the severed hand of a rebel killed. Maiming was also used as a punishment against locals for not fulfilling the rubber production quotas. To make up for the low production, troops actually began to use hands as currency. US author Pete Forbath in his book The River Congo described these horrific conditions as, quote, the baskets of severed hands set down at the feet of the European post commanders became the symbol of the Congo Free State. He went on to say, quote, collecting hands became an end in itself. Soldiers of the Force Publique brought the hands to the stations instead of rubber. Colonial administrators also kidnapped orphan children from communities and transported them to child colonies to work or train as soldiers. Estimates suggest that 50% of these children died. The focus on rubber had other disastrous consequences, as no able-bodied men were left to hunt, fish, or cultivate crops, and so famine and disease killed off even more of the native population. Millions were dying, the birth rate was dropping, and the trauma was widespread. Meanwhile, Leopold was busy building human zoos, such as the Africa Museum in his palace at Tervuren, which featured 267 Congolese people as exhibits. This cruelty, racism, and barbarity is seen by some as the first genocide of modern times. Demographers estimate that between 1880 and 1920, the population of the Congo was slashed by half, from 20 million people at the beginning of that period to an estimated 10 million at the end. Those who had set out on a civilizing mission had acted in a truly uncivilized manner. Despite the rest of European colonization and exploitation campaigns across the continent, it got so bad in the Congo that international pressure mounted against Belgium and its king. European writers and leaders condemned and exposed Leopold's regime. First, there was British journalist Edmund Dean Morrow. Joseph Conrad, Arthur Conan Doyle, and Mark Twain also joined the cause, and the sad reality of the Congo began to spread through their literature. Belgian Parliament eventually forced Leopold to relinquish control of his fiefdom in 1908, a year before he died. The transition wasn't cheap though. Leopold only relinquished his control after a financial compensation of 250 million Belgian francs, approximately more than $2 billion in present-day currency. Belgian Congo remained a colony until 1960 and the emergence of anti-imperial heroes like Patrice Lumumba, the first Prime Minister of the Democratic Republic of Congo. But Belgium from 1908 to the 1960s continued many of Leopold's racist policies, such as segregation between the natives and white settlers, maintaining very harsh work conditions for the locals used to exploit minerals, and the mass kidnapping of thousands of mixed-race children known as Métis from Burundi, DR Congo, and Rwanda in the 1940s and 50s. The scars of colonization have still not healed, and Leopold's controversial legacy in the Congo still haunts his country today. At the end of his days, Leopold had become very unpopular, not so much for his actions in the Congo, but rather his personal life. His inability to speak proper Dutch, his estrangement from his daughters, and fetish for teenage prostitutes was enough to discredit his name. However, as World War I threatened the very existence of Belgium, the fortifications Leopold advocated for in the eastern part of the country had slowed German troops down, and the wealth accumulated in the Congo had increased the stature and development of the small European nation. And so Leopold's nephew Albert erected statues of his uncle all over the country. And for years the result has been a glorified collective amnesia of Belgium's atrocities in Central Africa. Today, Belgium has yet to issue a formal apology or reparations to the DRC. Marking 60 years of DRC independence, a letter expressing regret for crimes of the past by the Belgian King Philippe was sent to the Congolese president. A first for any Belgian monarch and a reflection of the pressure mounting on Belgium to deal with its dark past. Impacted by the global rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, protesters in Belgium vandalized, burnt, and took down King Leopold's statues all over the country. In addition to calling for well-thought and rounded reparations to the Congo, Africans are still systematically excluded from employment, education, and opportunity, not only in Belgium, but across Europe and North America. Meanwhile, the DRC ranks at 176th place in the Development Index from 189 countries, and Belgium sits happily in 17th place, not to mention acting as the de facto capital of the European Union. The point is, if it weren't for colonization and the brutality and violence exported to Africa, the scenario could have been very different for a conflict-ridden poor country like the DRC. The question is, will those who came out on top admit, pay, and apologize for what they did?
Bring up colonization, bring up slavery, bring up exploitation and violence, and suddenly they'll abandon their exceptionalism. You know, they'll say, "Oh, everybody did that." Suddenly, they're not unique. You talk about their crimes, then they're not unique. They want to make their evil banal. They want to pretend that every civilization acted the same way that they do, and that every civilization will always act the same way that they do. So they trivialize and minimize their evil as commonplace. And the irony is that then they say that the genuinely unique thing about them is their virtuousness and their respect for human rights and justice and fairness and all that. The same person who just shrugged off colonization, you know, who just shrugged off slavery and violent subjugation. But of course they've got it backwards. The violence and the domination and the cruelty are absolutely the most unique and the most distinguishing features of their so-called civilization. And their virtues are actually their mediocrities. They haven't innovated or advanced in values or principles or ethics at all. They haven't improved in these fields whatsoever, certainly not upon previous civilizations.
In actuality, France is taking out of Africa trillions of dollars year in and year out. We are talking about giving you independence, but sign this pact for the continuation of colonization in a different format. As if it wasn't bad enough that we were divided up into the tiny little countries that we are today. The gift that Berlin Conference gave us, one other thing that France did between 1958 and 1961 in the name of giving us our independence as African countries. France forced the Francophone, and I hate that terminology. There is no such thing as Francophone, Anglophone. They made it up. But for the purposes of communication, I will use that. 14 of those countries, they said, in order for you to get your independence from us, you must sign this document. You thought they could have found a better name for the document. The document was called the Pact for the Continuation. I repeat, the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. We are talking about giving you independence, but sign this pact for the continuation of colonization in a different format. And I'm going to highlight some of those issues that they said you must agree to if you are going to be independent. Hello. Maybe we need to redefine the meaning of independence for the French. First, France said, you see, you monkeys, you don't know how to manage your money. We're going to demand that you deposit 85% of your bank reserves with the French Minister of Finance. Under the French Central Bank, under the control of the French Minister of Finance. France is then going to take your 85% bank deposits from each and every one of you. Deposit those funds in the French stock market under the French name, and you may or may not know the returns. Today, as we speak, the latest figures are saying for every 14 billion that France invests in the stock market from Africa, they are realizing upwards of 300 billion in return. Every year in, year out, because of these deposits from the African countries, France is taking out of Africa over $500 billion. Now figure it out. For every 14 billion, the returns on the investment are over 300 billion, and they are taking over 500 billion. So in actuality, France is taking out of Africa trillions of dollars year in and year out from us poor people, Africans. Between 1958 and 1961, France did something absolutely horrible. France made the Francophone African countries, and I don't even want to use that terminology, but I only use it for the purposes of conversation. The 14 countries which were formally, but still colonized by the French, they were forced to sign a document that they called the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. You heard me. The Pact for the Continuation of Colonization. If you want your independence, you must sign this. Guinea, Secretary said absolutely not. Mali said absolutely not. France, pack your bags and go on back home. France could not believe it. Could not understand that an African country, these monkeys, do not want to be affiliated to France. They said, we will show you. So history tells us France went into those two countries, took everything that they thought they had brought to those two countries, including the last teaspoon and chair, proceeded to pour concrete into the sewage pipes, completely devastating the two economies. The then newly appointed president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, in his efforts to rescue these two economies, created the first ever union of any African states, Ghana, Guinea, and Mali. But what that did was it made the other African countries realize that if they go against France, this was the fate that was waiting them. So what do? Wait the paper. And they signed. What did the pact say? One. The pact said, you monkeys, you don't know how to manage your money. So you shall deposit 85% of your bank reserves with the French Central Bank under the control of the French Minister of Finance. And that France is going to take your deposits from the individual countries, pool them together, invest them in the French stock market under the French name. And you, monkeys, you may or may not know the returns. Latest figures are showing this is still going on since 1958. France today is collecting out of Africa over $500 billion before investing. And when they finish investing this money, for every 14 billion out of Africa, they're recognizing over 300 billion. Now do the math. So when it's actually said and done, France is taking out of Africa trillions of dollars every year, and we, the poor Africans, are gladly giving it to France. And the same France has the audacity to look at us and call us poor people. 1958. They went further with the pact. You say, we will also print your own money. We will print your money for you. They instituted what they were calling the CFA, special currency for the African countries, and that only France can print that money for you. They went on to say all the contracts, large contracts, public and private, French companies have the first right of refusal. All your minerals discovered, yet to be discovered, France has the first right of refusal. Now, my brothers and sisters, if one of you was to wake up one morning and you're president of one of those countries, and your chief of staff walks in first day and starts reading you out the do's and don'ts as stipulated by the Pact for the Continuation of Colonization, what power do you have? None. And the same countries that are stealing from Africa, they have the audacity to look at Africa and say, Africans, what's wrong with you? Why can't you all take care of yourselves? Well, let's start by leaving our $500 billion on the continent. But what they do instead, they want to throw you with a smoke screen. Your African leaders are corrupt. Well, you know, I gave you that. I mean, not all African leaders are corrupt. Africa is a family. No family is complete without crazy Aunt Sally and crazy Uncle Tom. Nobody's perfect. Okay, fine, so I'll give you that. Their own figures are saying 50 billion is getting out of Africa from corruption. Fine, I give you that. But you do not want me to engage in a conversation that's solely limited to the $50 billion out of Africa through corruption. First, you don't tell me where it's going. You simply tell me it's getting out of Africa. But secondly, there's a bigger thief. You got two thieves, one with a briefcase with 50 billion and the other thief with a briefcase with 500 billion. I am a smart woman. You want me to ignore the one with 500 billion and put all my energies on a suitcase with 50? And by the time the one with 500 billion is done investing, we are talking trillions. Now, do you see how quickly the funds out of Africa from corruption become the larger chunk under the table? And they want you to stay under the table. So you never have to talk about what is on the table. We must wake up, Africans. We must think about our situations. How did we get here? Are we willing to let France...
The secret collapse no one's talking about. Europe is silently crumbling before our eyes. Let's build a wall of voices. Comment your country, and let's see how far awareness can really go. Once ruling the world, now Germany's industrial might is fading. France's political system is fracturing, and Southern Europe barely survives under crushing debt. Brussels' bureaucracy has replaced sovereignty with sanctions while making energy unaffordable. As European factories close, American LNG floods their ports, and U.S. arms deals multiply. Is this partnership or quiet occupation? The multipolar world rises, while Europe watches from the passenger seat, no longer leading, just being managed. The West's decline isn't coming, it's already here, hidden behind political theater and economic illusions. The question isn't if Europe will transform, but what will emerge from its ashes. The multipolar world is rising, and Europe is watching it happen. From the passenger seat,